Eternity Philops, November 5th, 2023. Hashtag soul sharing, hashtag coming out, hashtag no more secrets, hashtag the true confessions of a teenage mistress. Trigger and content warning: church abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse of a teen, suicide. This warning is serious. Shit's about to get real. Definitions: abuse, improper treatment, to put to a wrong use, an unjust, corrupt, or wrongful practice, to pervert, to injure, to maltreat, to hurt, to treat with cruelty, especially repeatedly, violation, defilement. Sexual abuse: when a child or young person is forced or tricked into sexual activities, involves multiple stages including grooming and secrecy. My testimony. On October 22nd, 2023, I sat my mother down and told her a secret I'd told only a handful of people over the past 22 years. My two younger sisters were with us for support, sitting on the bed with my mom while I sat in a chair facing them. They already knew what I was going to tell her. I'd practiced it in my head repeatedly and knew that there was nothing to do except say it. So I took a deep breath, looked my mother in the eye, and told her the truth. When I was 18, the bishop's wife of our church, affectionately called First by our community, had a long-term sexual affair with me that had lasted throughout my college life and some years beyond. For a moment, my mother sat in silence and just stared at me. I will never forget the way her face slowly fell as the impact of what I said hit her. I could see the pain in her eyes, and it broke my heart. As I awaited her response, I prepared myself for the worst. Maybe she didn't believe me. Maybe she thought I was disgusting for having an affair with a married woman. Maybe she'd blame my demonic gay spirit and tell me to get out of her house and never come back. I was ready for all of that. Instead, she got up from the bed, walked over to me, and hugged me tight. The first words she said to me were, "I'm sorry." She was sorry for not protecting me from a predator. She was sorry for not seeing any signs of the relationship happening. She was sorry because she had asked this woman, our church leader and her close friend, to mentor me, and instead she'd taken emotional and sexual advantage of me. Then my mother broke down and cried. Throughout the rest of the day, my mother, a woman I'd rarely seen cry throughout my life, wept like a baby. I had been prepared for my mother's response, but I realized I hadn't been ready for her pain. The pain of being betrayed by a friend. A friend who smiled in her face as she provided my mother comfort and counsel on her strained relationship with her gay child. A friend who preached anti-gay conservative values in the pulpit to our congregation. A friend who pretended to be a role model of marriage to our community. A friend who was sleeping with her daughter, sleeping with a church youth behind her and everyone else's back. A question some may have is, why did it take me so long to tell this truth? At the age of 40, over 20 years later, why does it matter now? Well, first off, the presence of abuse always matters. There is no expiration date on the impact it has on victims and their loved ones. But the larger answer is because, sadly, I just didn't know. It didn't take me 22 years to decide to tell the truth. It took me 22 years to realize the truth. It's taken me this long to understand that my relationship with the First Lady, a title many black churches give the wife of the male pastor/bishop, was indeed a form of abuse. Our relationship didn't happen in a vacuum. I wasn't some stranger she just happened to meet out in the world. I was a church youth whom she'd watched grow up alongside her own two children. She herself was a mother figure to the kids in our congregation and to my siblings. And again, she was close friends with my mother. There is absolutely no circumstance where someone could say it was okay for her to be sleeping with me. Sure, I was 18 and technically legal, but I was far from being a proper adult despite my accelerated maturity level. It was she who was a full-grown adult, not me. She was the married woman, not me. She was the church leader, not me. She was in the position of power, not me. She was even the one who initiated the intimacy, not me. But I never saw it like that. Throughout the relationship and for years after, I'd been made to feel like our being together was a decision I had made all on my own, like I had been the cause and the one in control. It was not until I was the age that she was when she began sleeping with me that I realized just how fucked up the situation actually was. When I reached my late 30s, the scales fell from my eyes and it finally hit me. This relationship had been abuse. Why? Because there is no way a grown adult should ever be having sex with a teenager, even a legal one. Now a fully grown adult myself, there is no doubt how infinitely immorally wrong it was for her to do such a thing. And yet, there she was, sleeping with me, she age 38, and I age 18. I recently learned that there is a specific word for this. I might not pronounce it correctly. Ephebophile. Ephebophile. That's the term for an older adult who is sexually attracted to post-pubescent teenagers aged 15 to 19. If the shoe fits. But back then, the age difference was a matter of pride to me. I felt validated. I was so mature that someone 20 years older than me wanted to be with me. And you couldn't tell me it wasn't love, because for me, it sincerely was. I was deeply in love with this woman. She was first to our church community, but she was first to me in other ways. My first emotional love and my first sexual lover. She was my Sandy and I was her sweetness. My song for her was Anita Baker's Angel, and hers for me was Sweet Love. Being with her showed me just how passionately I could love another person. I gave her my virginity. I gave her my heart. I gave her my soul. I would have dedicated the rest of my life to her happiness and growth if she'd accepted it. I wanted to. Even felt like God had put me in place too. And I was a fool. A young, dumb fool. In the 2 decades since then, I've grown and I've learned. I've learned that abuse doesn't always look like physical violence. It's often much more subtle and coercive. Abuse can be in the way someone talks to you and in how they treat you. I've learned that power plays a huge part in abuse. Having influence and authority is what allows predators to take advantage of their victims. I've learned that love, true love, does not look like what our relationship looked like. Ours wasn't a fairy tale of star-crossed lovers like I imagined in my head. It was a secret, immoral affair initiated by a so-called virtuous woman who saw that she could get from me what she wasn't getting at home. Devotion, affection, and sex. And years later, Once she was done with me, she tossed me aside and threw me away to go back to the illusion of the life she'd had before. I was left behind, her dirty little secret shoved into a dark corner. That abandonment broke me. I wanted to die, and I almost killed myself. The day I came closest to doing so, I checked myself into the hospital. I eventually got medication for my depression, and I even got a cat, my beloved Isis, R.I.P., so that I'd have a living creature to take care of. I didn't need to be alone with myself. And despite all of that, I never blamed her. I had always taken responsibility for the affair. After all, I was the church heathen with a demonic gay spirit. That's what my church taught. Homosexuality as a sin. That had been ingrained in me very well ever since I figured out that I was gay in middle school. And she was the bishop's wife, the example of morality and holiness. So I made everything my fault. I ignored the fact that her being with me meant that she was queer too. She chose to ignore that fact as well. For example, way back when gay marriage was a hot voting topic in North Carolina, I remember watching her in the pulpit talk about how marriage was between a man and a woman, and the congregation giving their amen in agreement. I wondered how she could say that out of the same mouth that kissed me. And even then, I still didn't blame her. But that's what abuse does. It makes you overlook and excuse being violated. It makes you feel at fault for the hurt and pain and conflict and confusion you're experiencing when you are, in fact, the victim. Abuse can also make you feel like you have to protect your abuser. I kept our relationship a secret precisely because I wanted to protect her. I knew us being together was wrong, but in my mind, I was the one who was wrong. If people found out, they'd blame me, not her. They'd blame my gay spirit and say the devil had gotten to her through me or something like that. That's the kind of church we were. Case in point, there was a trip to New York with my mother, first, me, and a few other church ladies. While my mother and a family friend were out shopping, she, first, was intimate with me in the hotel room that we shared with my mother. Her betrayal of my mother runs truly deep. Afterward, as we were leaving, two of the church ladies stuck their head out of their room and glared at us. They'd heard us through the adjoining wall. On the way home, one of them whispered to me in the car that what's done in the dark comes to the light. She was letting me know that she knew. But why would she tell me, the teenager, instead of the grown married woman? Because I was considered to be the wrongdoer. Those two members and their family eventually left the church, but as far as I know, nothing was ever said to the adult perpetrator about the incident. Just to me, the gay juvenile who was considered to be spiritually delinquent. And why hadn't she told my mother what she knew? Because churches do a horrible job of protecting their children. So many of us are assaulted, molested, and taken advantage of by church leaders who have been put on pedestals by their congregations. It's so bad that some of us don't even realize it's happening to us. I certainly didn't. If someone had asked me years ago if there was child abuse in our church, I'd have said no with absolute conviction. I didn't see that it was me. Too often, people either refuse to see or refuse to speak up. That's why I've decided to speak up for myself. I'm speaking up for my teen self who was sexually used and emotionally abused by a respected church leader. I'm speaking up in the ways others should have if they saw what was happening. I'm speaking up for the youth it's happening to right now. The child who needs someone to see what's happening to them and do something about it. But most of all, I'm speaking up to liberate myself. She and I last communicated via Messenger in 2018. At one point, I wanted her to acknowledge and confront the pain she'd caused me, and instead she told me that I needed to, quote, let it go and move on, that nothing would change concerning her past. She said she'd prayed about her, and evidently that's all she felt she needed to do. We were supposed to talk once more, but we never spoke again after that conversation. Perhaps if we had, it would have liberated me in a different way. But I'll never know her inner story, and I no longer care to. After all, predators don't take accountability for their actions. Predators do take for granted the silence of their victims, silence that is often compelled by shame. I was 35 then when we last chatted, and I still didn't see this as abuse. Now, 5 years later, I see it quite clearly. So I'm taking her advice. I am finally letting go, moving on, and giving myself closure. But I'm doing it my way. My letting go looks like releasing illusions. Releasing the illusion of being safe with her, the illusion of being loved by her, the illusion of being responsible for everything that happened with her. None of those things are true. My moving on means opening up about the relationship, opening up about the impact, opening up about the pain. I own my story and my truth. My closure is confession. Confessing to my family, confessing to my community, confessing to myself. My healing comes through revelation. For 22 years, the love I'd still held for her in my heart is what kept her secret in my throat. Now I free myself from both. I free myself from protecting her with my silence. The day after I told my mother what happened, I became emotionally overwhelmed and stayed in bed for a week. My soul was working to accept a new truth, that this woman whom I'd loved so deeply had never truly cared for me, that this cherished relationship that had been so formative to who I am today was nothing more than a cruel lie. My heart was broken again, and I had to experience a new dimension of grief and anguish. I still am. When I think about it, an intense wave of anxiety flows through me. I recognize that I'm having a 22-year delayed trauma response in my mind, body, and spirit, and I hold space for myself to go through it. And yet, even with the onset of this anxiety and trauma, I have been at peace with my decision to talk about this publicly. Part of that peace is my own value system of openness, communication, transparency, and vulnerability. I believe that we must be open about our traumatic lived experiences to help others through theirs. That we must communicate with one another for deeper understanding of one another. That we must be transparent about our thoughts and feelings, and that being vulnerable with each other is what leads to connection and healing. These are the values I live by as a person, as a friend and loved one to others, as a creative artist and wellness leader. These are the values that keep me accountable to the people I care about, the people I serve, the people who believe in me. But these are not values I was taught in my church. They are values I was taught by Spirit after I left the church and developed my relationship with God on my own. And through it all, Spirit has kept me. When I believed I'd burn in hell for my sexuality that I didn't choose and couldn't change because that's what my church had taught me, Spirit spoke to me directly and said, the only thing you need to be delivered from is believing that God hates you. When I wanted to die and didn't believe I'd make it to age 30, Spirit kept shining a light within me that got me through the darkness. Spirit has constantly guided my journey, sometimes overtly and sometimes subtly. I continue to trust God's direction, even when I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing. Even now, I don't know what will happen after I make this public post. How will people react? Will people from my past community believe me? Will any of them hold her accountable? Will they even care? If her congregation finds out, because she's the pastor of her own church now, will they continue to follow her? Are the youth of her church safe? Or has she preyed on the children of other members since me? If confronted, will she lie and try to spin it as an attack by the devil? Will people come after me and accuse me of making it all up? Will telling my truth negatively impact my businesses and my standing in my current communities? Will someone even try to physically attack me out of anger and resentment? Will I be safe? I don't know the answers to any of this, but Spirit has put me on the path to this moment for a reason, and I have faith that I'll get through it some way, somehow. What matters is that my sisters believe me, my mother believes me, and my family supports me telling my story as I see fit. That's all I need. With this post comes a rebirth. I enter the second half of my life, God willing I make it to 80, finally releasing the burden of this secret. I release my romanticizing an abusive relationship. I release looking back on that time together with fondness. I release the belief that she ever loved me. I release my remaining love for her. I release the inner narrative that tells me it was all my fault. I release being her dirty little secret. And I release worrying about what comes after this moment. It is beyond my control. What is in my control is my wellness and self-care. I'm starting counseling to really process what happened to me then and how it impacts me now. I need to explore how this abusive relationship amplified my abandonment issues and may have negatively affected all of my relationships after it. I need help understanding that what I felt was love may have actually been a detrimental trauma bond that I was groomed into. There's a real heaviness that has come with acknowledging and accepting such a troubling truth. I haven't felt anything like this before, not even when I first came out about being gay, which I did as a freshman in my college newspaper. This truth is different. It's dark and disturbing. It's not about who I am, it's about what was done to me. It's rooted in secrecy and shame. It's full of unanswered questions and random realizations that hit like a ton of bricks out of nowhere. But I'm committed to getting through it. Another term I learned recently is post-traumatic growth, or PTG. It is defined as positive psychological changes experienced as a result of the struggle with trauma or highly challenging situations. I never knew this term existed, yet I feel like it encompasses my entire life. I believe that our journeys are about growth, inner and outer, individually and communally. I've strived to grow from everything life has ever thrown at me, and I know I will grow from this too. Free, no longer am I bound. Free, no more chains holding me. Epilogue. While writing this piece, while writing this piece, which I drafted over several days before posting, I was moved by Spirit to go get the Bible from my youth from the bookshelf. Despite how scripture was constantly used to demean and judge me growing up, I did love my little Zondervan NIV student Bible. It's even got the curled pages and peeling cover to prove it. Bible in hand, I asked God one last time for direction, this time with a sign. Without looking, I would open the Bible with the intention of landing somewhere, anywhere, in Proverbs, which was my favorite book of the Bible growing up. If I did, I was truly on the right path of my decision to tell this truth, and I would no longer question it. I closed my eyes, thumbed through some pages to guess, and opened my Bible. With some fear in my heart, I peeked and looked down, and I saw the very first page of Proverbs. Truly to God be the glory. And it reads, 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. 2. For attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight. 3. For acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair. 4. For giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. 5. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. 6. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Let the church say amen and ashe. Hashtag journey with eternity. Hashtag me too.